Eshu elegwana kosi were. Awo unlo uto ne iwo ada afanbo osi. O batala mi ita ni ebo onilio abani shu. Eshu is the respected elder who flogs, confronts, uncovers fools. That one versed in mysteries uses truth to own you. He causes scatter to feed poverty. Obatala shakes rascals to have sacrifice. The owner of warnings is the one who is Eshu, Aboru, Aboye, Aboshishe, Ashe. May our Ebo reach our rune. May our Ebo be accepted. May our Ebo allow what we desire to come to pass. And so we say, Ashe. Asheo and Ashe. Divine, all blessed greetings and salutations. You are now sitting live with the Divine Prince, Pan African spiritualist, practitioner, author, and advisor, Elagun Oloye Hoodoo Obeya Bokur, sharing with you in all things spiritual, mystical, metaphysical, cosmic, universal, evolutionary, revolutionary, healing, and holistic from a Pan African hoodoo, world spiritualist perspective. Breathing in and understanding that all is truly and indeed a blessing if you can just see beyond the veils, for it is all just an illusion and a test and one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. This is my constant prayer, my mantra, affirmation, reverberation, reiteration, and it is my ever living reality. It is crucial to the very foundation of my inner standing, my teaching, my walk, my work along this divine, all blessed life path and journey. It is how I, the Divine Prince, make sense out of all that we're challenged with here in our daily existence on Mother, Father, Earth. And it is our personal place of power and inner standing, the place from where I begin, the place from where I realize and crystallize all my endeavors, understanding that I and I alone create and co create my divine destiny, and I alone create and co create my divine, all blessed reality. And so it is. Ashe, Asheo, and Ashe. Greetings and salutations this Monday, April 18th, 2022. And I am emanating and vibrating with you and for you now live, virtually, verbally, cosmically, quantum, universally from this working temple of the House of the Divine Prince. Thai potions, Hoodoo Central in this legendary, historic, beautiful, most enchanted city in America, New Orleans, Louisiana, the land of my ancestors and those who came before me along this hoodoo obeah life path and journey, passing down this great obeah stick along with the knowledge of the life giving herbs, roots, plants, rituals, spirits, minerals, and indeed the legacy, culture, traditions, the history, our sacred stories. Please do stop and click like, click follow. Please do subscribe on all available platforms, and particularly on blogtalkradio.com / the hyphen divine hyphen prince. You will get your most accurate and up to date show alerts. You can also please subscribe to my youtube.com / voodoo tie. V like Victor, D like David, Tye. VOODOOTYE, Voodoo Time. All is truly and indeed a blessing. It's amazing to me how life intersects with magic, how spirit intersects with nature, and how nature is ultimately a form of technology that requires our not only our acknowledgement and our awareness, but our understanding. In some cases, our inner standing. And technology is really about utilizing what's available in nature to create something, a tool or a mechanism or machinery that somehow enhances our lives, enhances our reality. So it's very curious, even at my age, how magic and spirit and reality intersect. And it's something that I've been able to document and confirm, not just in my own journey, but that of my great mother, the evangelist Savage, my beloved sister Wapani, and many others in my inner circle who indeed understand that regardless of religion or culture or philosophy, even spirit practice, there is a veil between ritual mechanism, ritual activity, um, following the rules, so to speak, doing what was taught and passing that down, following a format, and then engaging authentically, organically, purely with spirit. And it often shows up at the crossroads of our lives, of our daily existence. And indeed, the crossroads often involves the dynamics of the weather. And some of us check the weather, whether you live in the urban or the suburban or the rural, or the country. We check the weather. We prepare our children, ourselves, our businesses, in some cases, our lives, indeed, for weather. It's not something we can control necessarily. It's not something that we have authority and dominance over. It's something that we can best prepare and plan for the weather. And my godchildren, my family, and my spiritual community know I will often use weather as a symbolic reference to the nature of our waking reality and those things that come our way. And for my new listener, I'm very guarded, I'm very precise, I'm very specific about my wording. So please don't um, take my wording lightly. Please don't overlook my wording, and know that often when I'm hesitant, I'm seeking to be diplomatic. I often do that in the course of my readings and consultations. I will stop, I will hesitate, I will think in an attempt to generate a precise word. And words we know are all coded. All words, all language is coded. So a word that speaks to more than one area of our consciousness, more than one area of our experience, more than one area of our journey, in attempt to gift to you, share with you a greater awareness of something that just maybe that switch has never been turned on before, has never been flipped before. And you've heard me say on more than one occasion that voodoo is nature. Voodoo, when I use it, it's an umbrella word. It's specific to New Orleans and Louisiana and Mississippi Delta and Low Country and all that stuff. But it's also Ifa, Santeria. It's also a Khan. It's also the practices of the Sangoma. So indeed, there is no voodoo without nature. There is no Ifa without nature. There is no Aboriginal indigenous spirit practice without nature. And another way of viewing Nature is technology. A piece of wood and a rock is a piece of wood and a rock in the hands of someone who lacks a particular awareness or creative imagination necessary for technology. A desire to create something that enhances, makes life better, gives us a sense of security, protection, defense in some cases, particularly when we think about weather and what weather is. And on a day like this, on a red day like this, when we invoke spirits and Loa and Orisha that speak to weather, Sakbo and Bade speak to weather, we must meditate on the ramifications beyond just the rain, the wind, the snow, the sleet, the heat of the summer, the humidity, the dryness, the wetness, the mold, the mildew. But think about how we, as an organic body, and indeed a unified organic body with the earth itself, as one breathing, living, recreating entity, we all experience weather. We all respond to weather. We all have to, because it's not something we choose to accept or not accept, to go along with or not to go along with. We all have our unique adaptations to weather. And so it's a prime symbolic reference for me personally, individually, in my ministry, in my practice, in my teaching, in my magic, in the sharing of vital power, vital information, vital secrets and mysteries, vital rituals, and making them not only intelligible, but usable, result oriented, right here, right now, in this most present moment in time space. And so on a day like this, a very, very red day like this, I think about the weather beyond just the symbolic references that we have attributed to it, but also how it shows up in our magic, how it shows up in our culture, how it shows up in our ritual practices. Greetings, everyone. I'm with you. Please forgive me. I'm with you. I'll come and acknowledge everyone individually and collectively, momentarily. Please come on in. Please invite a friend, family, a friend of me. Let them know that Divine Prince is in rare form today and you don't want to miss it. Have them come on in. All is a blessing. But I think about, again, these great Loa and Orisha and powers that we now sort of mirror and symbolize and connect to weather, symbolism, natural nature. Ocean is water and river water and cool, and we say Yemaya is water, flowing water, but it's often the foam that sits on top of the salty seawater. And so we have all these attributions that we make to these deities that are not just, natural, archaic, symbolic references, but speak to magnetism, and electricity, and black holes, and the universe, and the cosmos in a much bigger scope of magic than even religious folk or spiritual folk, or i.e. magical folk, even contemplate, and how that shows up in our reality. The tornadoes, the hurricanes, the flooding storms, the lightning and the wind. In the balance of nature, what greater messages are being spoken to us through weather, and as weather shows up in our lives, in our reality? Greetings, everyone. Come on in. Just bear with me. I want to take you on just a little bit of a journey today about this power that we've come to understand and operate in. I like to first start, as I often do, with just a little bit of history. I want to talk more about the fawn. I want to talk more about the airway. These ethnic groups that we often attributed with being the great grandparents, if you will, of voodoo worldwide, within the Pan African diaspora, wherever you find it within the diaspora. The Fon, the Airway, and the Yoruba, a great triad of ethnic culture and tradition and gold and reference for us to pull from and continue to pull from. And certainly, just a quick side note, get your DNA done. And if you haven't checked your Ancestry.com or your 23andMe in 30 days or 60 days, understand that they continuously update as more DNA So I want to talk first before I return to my story about the thunder and the lightning and the wind. Um, Sogbo and Bade and Oya and Shango and Agwe and many others. But the Fan and Airway religion, the Airway and Fan related linguistically and culturally, live along the coast in the hinterland of Benin, what we know today as the former Dahomey. Today we know it as Benin, but it was the former Dahomey, Togo, Eastern Ghana, and Western Africa. And they number some 3 million, depend on fishing, intensive farming, crafts, particularly weaving. And we know there's a great weaving tradition and gift and connection among the Gullah Geechee nation on the east coast of the U.S. that still continues and lives on today. And the Fon and the Airway live mostly in towns and large villages. Europeans in contact with the Fon of Dahomey late in the 17th century left an exotic and exaggerated picture of kings, wealth, women soldiers who they referred to as Amazons, brutal human sacrifice, and slave trading. And such a picture has fallen into disrepute. Today, the seat of the royal family is still centered in the towns of Abomey and Kana, which differ somewhat in both social organization and religion from the hinterland. The people today are organized into dispersed patrilineal clans, in each of which the oldest living man is said to be between the two worlds of the living and the dead. There are traditionally a complex hierarchical organization from the compound to village chief to king. And the kingdom has now lost its former political prerogatives, but still retain many traditional ceremonies required by worship of the royal ancestors. The airway of Togo and Ghana, historically representing the outpost of Fan civilization, share a sense of identity and history of migration, ultimately from Oyo in Nigeria, same place that Shango is said to be from, to have been born into, became the third king of, that is still today commemorated annually. And then the Northern Inland Airway lacked centralized political authority and have localized clans, while the coastal groups, known as the Anlo Airway, have a tradition of weak kingship, dispersed clans, and ancestral shrines that are of central importance in the religious life of the community. In each airway lineage, there is a carved wooden stool, which is the locus of the cult of the lineage deity. During rituals, this stool is placed to which ancestral spirits may temporarily be summoned and consulted. The ancestral cult, believed to be necessary for the perpetuation of the clan, is the focal point of fond social civilization and of much religious activity. Funerary ceremonies for dead adults are concluded 3 years after the death so that their souls are not lost to the clan. Every decade or so, the ancestors are established. That is, they are deified as Voodoo, family gods, by a rite in which a local group head must name all the dead group members from the most recently dead back to the earliest dead. And in this rite, an ancestral shrine or dojojo is built. There, the Voodoo are annually fed and honored with dancing and praise songs. The individual who is seen as the human founder of a clan is also a deified ancestor. Because of this status, the founder is worshipped by a cult of priests and initiates who do not necessarily belong to a particular clan. Royal clan members, however, may worship only their own ancestral deities and cannot be called initiates of public pantheons of gods. Ancestral worship is their only form of religious affiliation. And more powerful than the Voodoo are the spirits of those who lived so long ago that their names are no longer known by the descendants. These ancestors, personified by Dambala Uedo, are important because a forgotten ancestor is angry and dangerous. Also in the Voodoo category are the spirits of twins, of children born after twins, and of malformed and aborted children. These last spirits are considered very powerful as they guard the rivers over which the spirits of the dead must pass in order to reach the other world. Furthermore, the world of the dead reflects that of the living, with local rank there being established by priority of birth in the land of the living. The Fon have a number of variant cosmologies, and some disagreements exist concerning the identity of various deities. Some say that the world was created by one god, Nana Baluku, both male and female, who gave birth to twins named Mawo and Lisa. The first female, Mawo, was given command over the night, and the second male was associated with the day. Sometimes you see them symbolically referenced as the sun and the moon. And opinions vary as to the identifying characteristics or even the relationship between the twins, whose names are often merged together in everyday speech as though they were single deity, Mawo Lisa. In addition to being siblings, Mawo Lisa are also considered spouses. Other public gods who represent the forces of nature that affect all humans alike include Sagbata, the earth deity who watches over the fields and waters of the earth and punishes offenders with smallpox, and who we today know as Saint Lazarus, Saint Lazaro, um, Babalu Oye, deity names of that ilk. In Sagbo, also the partner to Bade, Sakbo and Bade, thunder and lightning, or Harvioso, the thunder and sea god who sends fertilizing rains, but also punishes with a double-headed axe or a thunderbolt. And Under each of these is a pantheon of named deities, or voodoo, as they're referenced in Fan and Ewe, ranked according to their birth order, each with different tasks. Worship of each pantheon of these deities is in the hands of an assigned and associated priesthood. None of these three pantheons of deities has universal worship. So no single God is all powerful, not even Mawo, who is the parent of the others and controls life and death. The writing of Mawo is called Fa, just like the writing of Olodumare is called Ifa, the destiny of the universe, a highly specialized system of divination derived from the Yoruba, administered by Bokonon, Boko, Bokur, Babalawo, Ianifa, and other qualified practitioners, which permits us to know and decree human destiny. And only the divine trickster Legba, who is the youngest son of Mawo, can change a person's destiny. His worship is universal. We find Legba universally over the Pan-African diaspora. And unlike the other major deities, divinities, and individual with neither priests nor cults, other forms of divination practice, including water and mirror gazing, and the study of the entrails of animals. And most widespread of all forms of divination are magical charms, known as bo, and many and various types of bo. These are said to be given to humans by Legba and Sagbata, and especially by the Aziza, these small hairy creatures who live in ant hills and silk cotton trees. The airways share many aspects of culture, religion, and art with the Fawn, and indeed occasionally travel to Benin to obtain shrines and spiritual aid. They share many gods, including Mawo, the remote creator god associated with the sky, and Torgbi Niabla, the head of the nature gods or the Tro, associated with war and thunder, like Hervioso, like Shango, like Oya. And similar too are the practice of Afa divination and the Legba cult, including both Dulegba and Alegba, town and individual protective deities. There is, however, ambiguous usage among the Ewe of such key terms as voodoo, Dulegba, troll, Dezo, which is a form of an amulet, which are often confused by many. And most of these deities come from outside of Ewe land, and each is thought of as a discrete entity. For example, we like to mix and confuse and compare and similarize between Legba and Eshu and Elegba and other forms of deities that have and share similar dynamics, in some cases even share root lineages, if you will, but are practiced distinctly differently among various paths and ethnic groups of people, and indeed are practiced uniquely, distinctly differently, even among the paths that exist now here in the Americas. And this inconsistent usage probably reflects the differences in the history of migration and the introduction of new cults, new ethnic groups and their traditions into established practices in any particular geographic region. And vast numbers of our enslaved ancestors were taken from the Fan Airway coast here to the New World, and Haiti is not the only place. Most certainly, we have documents of them being brought here directly to Louisiana. And of course, those Louisiana lineages would have made their way into the Mississippi Delta. A lot of my Mississippi cousins, and certainly Alabama and the Carolinas and many other regions of the South. And when we consider the relocation, being snatched away, families being broken up and being moved to other areas, so too did this Fan Airway Yoruba bloodline sort of spread through a great many of us. And we find Yoruba uh, connections, we find Nigeria and Ghana and Cameroon connections in our similar DNA results. And synchronized with Catholicism in Louisiana, Haiti, Brazil, Cuba, Jamaica, Fan and airway religions contributed important influences to the formation of much of the New World voodoo, and practices that we all know and honor and love today, and the cult of Shango, among others. Christian missionaries have worked among the Fan in the airway since the mid 19th century. Today, the vast majority of people declare themselves to be Christian, although most airway are involved in both Christian and traditional religious practices. In the North, reportedly, many rites of passage are now abandoned. Traditional funerals, especially in the South, however, are still very important. And for those who are erudite and astute and like to research and are paying attention, we see many similarities in the story of the airway Fan, their interaction with the colonizers and the missionaries, thus being transferred to the New World. And we now see those same synchronicities today in our communities here in Louisiana, certainly in Mississippi and in the Gulf Coast regions, among the Gullah, in the Gullah Geechee, certainly we find a similarity in practice and tradition, and we find a love for funerary rites and the second line, and showing up for the repast and the funeral, here in Louisiana. But people still won't necessarily speak voodoo out loud, talk about voodoo out loud without a fear of some sort of stigma, negative connotation, shoo and whispering about it. So I want to talk today more about the weather, uh, particularly Ksagbo and Bade, and how we sort of envision the positives, the rebuilding, restructuring, renewing creative power within weather, and particularly weathers that we don't always like or want to deal with. I get anxiety every year as I count the days towards the hurricane season, and still the answer is be prepared, um, anticipate, and be greater prepared. Greetings, pretty girl. Jean, welcome, welcome, beloved. Come on in. Certainly appreciate you, Chef Bougie. Certainly appreciate you and your family. Greetings to you and yours. Alexis Williams, greetings, beloved, to you and mom and them. Come on in, beloved. Divine greetings and salutations to you. Thank you, Shamafia, Abu Shishe, Ashe. May our Ebo reach a room. May our Ebo be accepted. May our Ebo be bring about and desire what we come to pass. Thank you so much for being with us. Neophyte Bokor, peace and love to you and your family. Asheo to you and yours. Jennifer Anderson, greetings, beloved. Come on in. S. Marie, come on in, beloved. Love you. Thank you so much for all of your persistent consistency with this platform and this show. Uh, Now, listen, beloved, you know I'm not even going to try, but I am going to try. But if I get it jacked up, non Zinzele, please forgive me, beloved. Okay. Thank you so much for being with us. The Goddess Initiative. Come on in, God children. Come on in, family. Come on in, House of the Divine Prince. Come on in. Greetings, Craig Burns. Thank you so much for your consistent participation and love. Ogundele, welcome, beloved. Iba Bawani Al, come on in, come on in. Alicia Rufus, Wholeness, first time making it to the live, and we appreciate you. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much, the Infinite One, Liz. Peace and love, beloved. I enjoyed hugging your neck on Sunday morning. Yes, indeed. I love and appreciate my local New Orleanians. Thank you so much, beloved. Come on in. JP Tarot, welcome, beloved. Come on in. Thank you so much for your consistent support, love, and appreciation for the show. Remy Richardson, greetings, beloved. Thank you so much for being with us, sharing. Come on in. We certainly appreciate you and yours. Shoskins, come on in, beloved. So grateful for your presence. Nathan Burns, greetings and salutations to you and yours. Yes, indeed. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Jeffrey Odyssey, beloved, come on in. I want to say partner in crime, but that might not necessarily be appropriate. But I appreciate you. Jeffrey Odyssey, come on in. I certainly appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening. Yeah, I've been busy. My local family certainly knows and understand I've been busy. My long-term listeners know when I'm absent or not present at high noon, they can almost automatically assume where I am. And certainly if you're following and connecting and communicating with me in Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and Instagram and Blogger and LinkedIn and all the other places where we can be found and shared and communicate with this open, free technology that all of us have available to us. You know that I'm doing movies, TV shows, documentaries, private projects, and I'm just working and overwhelmed. Sometimes it takes weather to sit me down, to get me to be still. And I had the opportunity this weekend to spend some time with my mother in the flesh for the first time since before the pandemic. And certainly that was indeed a blessing. The infinite one lives, had a chance to meet my mama at the coffee house in the flesh. So we certainly appreciated that opportunity to connect. And it gave me an opportunity to be still, for a moment and really reflect on what I'm doing personally, not just as a voodoo priest and a practitioner and an activist and a minister and all the other stuff, but a performer, but just as a person, what am I doing? Now, of course, that then informs how I move in ministry, how I move in terms of voodoo. And certainly we all should continue to prepare and anticipate the weather, but also prepare and anticipate for a future, and indeed for a future that mirrors our best interests. And sometimes when in the weather, when going through the weather, it's really easy to get caught up on the rain and the snow and the heat and the humidity and whatever you know, I don't know the word, the symptoms of the weather are that we have to sort of adjust to. But on a metaphysical, quantum metaphysical level, it certainly represents the weather that we all face, that we all have faced, that we all will continue to face cyclically, seasonally, in its due season, in its time, and sometimes out of season. There's the rogue tornadoes that come out of season. There's the rogue, summer like thunderstorms that roll through in early spring. And certainly it mirrors life, it mirrors the reality of life and how we sit in that, how we respond to that, how we anticipate that, how we prepare for that means everything about our perception of that reality in that moment. We sometimes compare it to the athlete who puts themselves through a certain amount of pre-planned, predetermined pain and determination. Okay, pre-planned weather, with a goal. And so we don't have to be victims to the weather. We don't just have to prepare and anticipate and then hunker down, until the storm passes over. But we can also learn with each storm. I've learned with each storm. Certainly, we learned through Hurricane Katrina. We learned subsequently through several tornadoes that have come through here in the most recent years. We understand the dynamics of climate change now, and that New Orleans will see rogue hurricanes in a way that we have not experienced before. And certainly, Hurricane Ida, taught us, should have taught us, but certainly taught us more about the preparation for weather, how to live for it, how to get up and move away from it in time, how to pre-plan for it, how to see it coming, uh, and certainly how to adjust our minds, our bodies, our spirits, our emotions, our budgets, our families, our peer groups for those times of imbalance and upheaval, however temporary or with length they might be. Hurricane Katrina turned out to be something with a little length for many of us, and depending on your degree of preparation or your or degree of accessibility to resources, had a lot to do with the timing that you spent in the water, the timing that you spent away from the city, after the evacuation went into full effect, the time that it might have spent for you to return, certainly was affected by, again, that planning and pre-planning. And so certainly spirit is something that we should be actively planning and pre-planning for. Ritual and craft and magic and ceremony is not just about defensive magic. It's not just about protecting against demons and protecting against witchcraft and protecting against dark magic and protecting against, frenemies and haters and backstabbers, when it comes. It is about a state of preparation, pre-planning, and anticipation for something that's not necessarily the most frightful thing. We don't always want to look at whether it's the most frightful thing coming, though if you live in certain regions of the world, you anticipate the most frightful thing coming. Southern Los Angeles lives with the threat of the big one every day. We live with the threat of the big hurricane every year. Hawaii lives with the threat of the big volcanic eruption every year. Washington State and Northern California, you know, Oregon live with the threat of not hurricanes, volcanic eruptions from Mount Shasta and whatnot every year. So depending on where we are, sometimes can determine how close we might feel, because we know that that's an illusion, how close we are to the weather and the subsequent effect it might have on us. Much like crime, violence, war, how close are we to the war that we determine that it affects us personally, directly? And certainly enough for us to anticipate, plan, prepare for the future. Or do we wait until it happens? I can remember the very first time that I had a contact with Sakbo and Bade. I was 15, maybe 14, still at home, still in the house with my parents, my sister Wapani, we had gone to a amusement park that day. We were still at Greater Scripture Church at that time, a Greater Scripture Cathedral, they're calling themselves now. They've relocated, and much of that generation has moved on, passed on. So it's probably a completely new body of people altogether. But at that time, we were at Ninth and O Streets, Northwest Washington, D.C., sort of diagonally across from that farmer's market. Sat on the corner there. It's a high rise building there in that spot now. And we went to an amusement park. I can't recall the name, Great America or Great Mountain or something, a 2 hour or more drive from the DMV. And not Hershey Park. Um, I can't remember the name right now. But a very popular, huge amusement park at that time. Something that my household rarely did. My dad didn't allow fun or entertainment or relaxing, or anything like that. So, it was a rarity for us to not only get out and have an outing, um, but to then get out and have an outing and be in public. There was a certain degree of safety that I can only speak for myself. I won't attempt to speak for Wapani, but there was certainly a degree of safety that I felt from my father in public. I knew that there were certain behaviors that he was not going to show or demonstrate in public. He had a reputation to uphold. He had a 33rd to protect. Um, he had a background he was still trying to hide and conceal and could not necessarily draw a whole lot of attention to. Though he was, one arrogant Lucifer, um, he was a smart Lucifer. And so he knew when and where to do and say certain things. And so we were, going out, 3 hour drive going, 3 hour drive coming back, a whole day at the park. This is a day off, just a vacation for me. Of course, with no pocket money. Understanding, I grew up in a middle class family, that I now understand that my mother paid for everything while my father spent his entire income on suits and snakeskin shoes and hats, and women, and producing other children and other families. My mama really supported, all of our life, and certainly our lifestyle. And because my father was arrogant, we had to look good Sunday, but certainly anytime we left the house, we had to maintain a certain appearance. And you sort of anticipate that, I think, in the suburbs anywhere in America. Sort of a ideal of what things look like, and certain appearances. I'm not even speaking on labels, just appearances, And so I'm anticipating this day, and we go and we have a great time. Of course, I'm supported and fed and entertained by other folks in the church community, their children, certainly their parents. Not my father, not my parents. My mother was not allowed to do more than my father would allow her to do at any given moment, and certainly with a degree of my mother's own upbringing. My grandmother was a bit of a socialite, and things had to look a certain way for women of the 1930s, the 20s, the 30s, and certainly my mother being born in the 40s. Um, you were ladylike. You carried a certain appearance. You acted a certain way in public. So, my mother wasn't one to be embarrassed in public. And so she had her reason for keeping up the dynamic. He had his reason for keeping up the dynamic. And certainly the children find their own crazy reason for keeping up the dynamic. as children, even though they don't understand the dynamic, you know, that their parents often uh, get them caught up in. And so we spend this day, great day at the amusement park, great time. You know, we kikiing and laughing, which was again was a rarity in my family. On the way back, and we make it back to the house, and it's storming as we're making this, you know, 2.5 hour drive back to the house. You know, and the storms are greatly intensifying as we get back to the DMV. Lightning, thunder, wind, rain. I mean, just more than normal. We always got thunderstorms in the DMV. We had clearly 4 seasons in that region in the 1970s, early 1980s. And so this was a stronger than usual storm. And we get back, and now we've already done this before, by the way. Let me be clear. We've done this before, have gone away, have left town, if you will, to come back and find that our dog had killed itself, had tried to break into the basement door of the house with the chain on um, in a storm, um, a chain attached to a concrete pillar, and breaks through this door and sort of gets halfway in the door and hangs itself. So we've already lived this this story, okay? So we get back, and this new dog, you know, my dad had to have dogs, always a dog in the house. He never treated them well, but he always had to have dogs, and I had to be the caretaker for the animals in most scenario. If there's no dog food, no one, you know, in the house of four had thought to feed the dog before we had left the house that morning, you know, and made this journey. So it's my fault, you know. And now I've got to make this walk. Some of you know the area, Nova Avenue and Glacier Avenue uh, in Maryland to Marlboro Pike, probably about a mile from there to the Forestville Mall, where the giant shopping center or the giant grocery store used to be. That whole area has been redeveloped. I can't recognize that area at all anymore, on the ground or on a map. That whole area has been completely redeveloped. But many of you know where I'm talking about. So it's a you know, a mile there, a mile back. You know, a 14-year-old in a thunderstorm, carrying the heaviest possible bag of dried dog food. I can't remember what the poundage was back in the day. They've reduced the size of everything in modern times. So the dog food bag would have been a little bit heavier back in that time. And now I've got this bag, no umbrella, in the rain, okay, trying to make it back down Marlboro Pike, you know, which is a sloping, curving, you know, community. Once upon a time, it was a very forested, woody, green. It was ancient dinosaur ground. All of Coral Hills, Maryland, Bradbury Heights, District Heights, Forestville. It's dinosaur country if you understand what's beneath your feet. And it was much more visible to us in the 70s before deforesting and commercialization and bringing in all these new lovely condominiums and complexes and co-ops that you all live in today in that neighborhood. None of that existed. That was raw nature when I grew up there. We'd ride bikes and dirt bikes and down hills and through, you know, puddles and often on top of fossilized wood and dinosaur prints that we didn't even realize the time was there. My first experience with gemstones and finding stones naturally in nature before I knew they had any kind of, you know, myth attached to them, was in, you know, the woods of that community. And so it's a sloping area, and there's a space right there off of Marlboro Pike now. I believe today it's a school. It's been preserved as a natural reserve, but there's a school there, a brand new school there. Um, but there used to be a drive-in theater there. Hillside Drive-In is what it was called. And so I'm right in front of Hillside, and across the street from that drive-in was a Citroen, a foreign car shop, Citroen, which looked a lot like the cars from the Jetsons to me at that time. It was almost like a museum. Even in the 70s, it was a museum. Citroen cars had a very short life here, I believe, in that time. They had a very Asiatic, futuristic, out of this world, funky kind of appearance. It's a landmark that would certainly stick in the mind of a kid. And just across the street from it, on the same side of the block, across from the theater, was another more American auto dealership. And it's raining and it's storming and thunder and lightning and wind. And I've got this, I don't know, it might have been 40 pounds bag of food back then. And I've got it on my head. It's giving me some protection from the rain, and it was wrapped in that thick brown paper. If some of you remember, I haven't bought dog food in years, but that's what it was in the 70s. And just as I get in front of this auto dealership, not the Citroen place, but the more American place, across the street from it, just explodes, just blows up, without sign, without warning, um, just blows up, and of course I'm just furious at this point, even at that age, with the abuse and the violence and what I had to put up with my dad, with my mother, and my sister had to be, put up with my dad, and here I am out in the middle of the storm with this, you know, and so I guess I'm desensitized and I don't respond to the explosion, desensitized, but also still operating in a sense of fear. I've got to get home with this bag of dog food. I ain't got time to investigate or anything with the man's crazy, as my father. And so I make it on back to the house, and things are eerily peaceful in the house. And my dad has a type of energy that's palatable. I mean, you can feel it 20 minutes before he makes it to the house. You can feel it, you're upstairs, 3 levels up, he's in the basement. You can feel it, he's in the backyard. You're asleep, you can feel it. He was the type of violent that would wake you out of your sleep, kind of violent. He was the type of explosive that could go from 0 to 120, on a dime. So his energy is always felt in the house. And I get back and things are eerily peaceful in the house. And there's no explosion, there's no violence, there's no extension cord. The whole, initial um, heat, of the moment, it has dispersed, and the storm is, calming. It was later that I found out that he had been sitting in a car across the road watching me. So apparently, between the weather and my mother, I'm going to assume, he made his way out the house to ensure that I was at least okay in this weather. I'm talking about an unusual storm, okay? So he witnessed this place exploding at the time. And it was really my first encounter with Shango. I would not hear the name Shango for a decade after that, maybe 15 years after that, before I would hear the name Shango clearly and make an association with it in lightning. My relationship to Sogbo and Bade goes back much further than my relationship with Shango. So my association with lightning and thunder and wind at that time would have been Sokbo and Bade, would have been from a voodoo perspective, lightning, electromagnetism, electricity, much like we would see in an electrocardiogram, of your is it your brain or your heart, and how that power is mirrored in nature. The macrocosm mirrors the microcosm. The microcosm mirrors the macrocosm. It's mirrored in nature. It's mirrored in the universe. It's mirrored in our bodies, if you will. And so there's a certain response we have, to the sound of thunder, the cracking of thunder and lightning, being caught unawares, that affects the heart, that affects the body at a literal level, much like stress and how we respond to stress and certain types of stress affect our body, and in some cases can have either a positive or negative response to how we move, how we operate. And so I view and have had to view weather as a runaway at 15. I've been caught in the weather many times. I've been caught in the rain many times. Um, Developed a unique skill and ability to not get wet for long periods of time in the rain until I made my destination. And again, not immediately identifying these things as somehow magical and ritual oriented, but as extensions of spirit and nature. Often when I was on those uh, foot in front of the other journeys, you know, to a store or a long distance from some location that he would refuse, to come and pick me up from, or refuse to allow my mother to come and get me from. Um, I would often be in a state of prayer, trance, meditation, chanting, singing. I had certain songs that I would pull, from my Rolodex. Some of them Christian, some of them, gospel, some of them R&B, some of them, ritual, spiritual, cultural, songs that I would pull in certain moments ritually, specifically with a learned understanding that there was some combination of music, rhythm, sound, harmony, and movement and action that was taking place, and indeed ritual and ceremony. I would spend a great deal of time at Rock Creek Park and at the river, um, Wheaton Park, which has this, Asiatic uh, garden setting in it. I'm curious if that still exists. Um, like you're in the middle of Japan, surrounded by water and plant life and koi fish and, places that I could transcend my reality in a very ceremonial, ritual, spiritual way before I put that math together. I did not have that experience of sort of waking up to ritual and magic and Ifa or voodoo and sort of being enchanted with it and sort of coming by it first from sort of this magical ritual place. That just wasn't my journey. I came by this practice, this lifestyle, first culturally, historically, spent a lot of time in encyclopedias. I spent a lot of time in documentaries, spent a lot of time in the Smithsonian Institute and its multitude of buildings that at that time was free um, to the public, that was free, to young people. The Air and Space Museum, the Natural History Museum, the Art and Science, I believe it is, Museum, the Art Museum. Um, I have a cousin, well-known black painter, probably had his heyday in the 70s. who's featured and may still be featured in the National Art Museum. So I spent a lot of time in these places exploring other worlds, other cultures, literally and figuratively, that first expanded my awareness of sort of this natural magic, this natural voodoo that exists in nature before sort of putting that religious ritual context together with it. And so for me, it still is and will always be an extension of nature. Iyami is an extension of the natural power in the Black woman, the natural power in the woman born in Mother Earth, born in the cradle of humanity. It's an extension of indeed nature, and so I wrestle even to this day with words like witchcraft and magic, and particularly when it has that negative connotation that the world would try and give us, for operating in these traditions. And so I've spent a lot of time in storm. Another practice I was taught by my elders on my journey was to envision weather, envision nature, any aspect of nature. Just choose something one day in your meditative space and pretend to be that thing, pretend to become that thing, attempt to experience that thing from an organic space. Close your eyes, most certainly breathe, and find your creative space and then envision yourself in that thing. And for those of you who find imagination a little bit more challenging, uh, understand from a scientific perspective, we are just this carbon based organic DNA, you know, substance, clay and dirt, separate from that which is most, you know, honored about who we are, which I like to call our God self. Our consciousness, the part of us that gives us personality, that's thinking, that's interpreting what the vessel is hearing. It's not there. It's not connected to the body itself. It's spirit and essence that we still don't fully understand, how it gets breathed into and created into this organic mix that we are. But from this organic mix, we are but DNA and molecules and atoms, you know, relocating and being regifted and recycled and repeated over and over again. That part that we honor and acknowledge that gives us self is God, is spirit, and lives way much beyond the physical boundaries, the physical limitations of earth and earth law. And so in using our imagination to envision storm and what storm is and how we live in storm and sit in storm and create and recreate through storm, remove what's no longer useful, beneficial, get rid of that old dead bark, that old dead tree that might become a fire hazard later on in the heat of the summer. The storm comes through and moves that, blows that away, clears that, creates fresh root, fresh ground, fertile land for new life. But there's also that rebuilding when humanity stuff gets tore up and destroyed, that opportunity to rebuild. Certainly, we learn living in this hurricane bowl that is New Orleans, um, how to rebuild, how to renew, how to continue on, how to survive, and in many cases, how to live in the moment and enjoy in the moment. Some of you would be surprised to know that there are bars and some restaurants that never close during a hurricane, never close. They might have to close their shutters, their hurricane shutters. They might have to close the doors for a while, but they never close. We have a tradition of hurricane parties in New Orleans. There's some people who party before hurricane and all through the hurricane. And so there is space for us to interpret. When we give space, when we create space, when we allow for space, when we take time to breathe or count to 10, there is opportunity to create space that allows us to create and recreate a reality that mirrors our best interest, even in the midst of the storm. Now, you might not feel all joyful and stuff. I've been there. Oh, I've been there. I've been depressed. I've been miserable. I've been sad. And there's a place where that's healing and cathartic, and you have to release, and you have to be aware that there's a problem. And that's a part of the awareness that there's a problem. And then you begin to examine the problem and look at the problem in the best case scenario. Now, if you're in denial or you don't want to look at it or you're trying to get the quick fix on it, then you're going to miss the jelly and donut. You're going to miss that part. But it's in sitting in the storm and being pushed to your limits, sometimes emotionally, spiritually. We experienced that through the pandemic, and realizing that you can expand beyond your previous comfort zone, your previous awareness of what you thought your comfort zone was, your previous awareness of what was available to you, what resources might have been available to you, how your friends, families, or neighbors might act. We learn a lot in the course of not having power for several days, not having access to resources sometimes for several days, not always knowing how the city or the state or the government is going to respond sometimes in the midst of a potential or a probable or a present disaster, you know. And so life has also, as a young runaway teen who walked many hundreds of miles on tennis shoes, gym shoes, leather shoes, combat boots, walked hundreds of miles to learn metaphysical, spiritual, magical, religious, cultural lessons that I share freely every day in this space with you. And so there's a way to look at Oya and Shango and Sakbo Bade and Agwe and these forces, these deities, Loa and Orisha, and other forms, Abathon and other forms that we say, oh, that's just myth, or that's just a symbolic representation of, or that's just her, natural body form. And indeed, it is a natural body form, but it's also our natural body form. One of the secrets and the mysteries is we are the Orisha, we are the Loa, we are the ancestors. We are the ascended ancestors. But we also the ancestors that didn't make it. We also the ancestors that had to repeat it. We also the ancestors that made mistakes. We are but a recycling of all that has ever been here from an earth plane perspective. All that we envision as new or create as new is a product of our God self, our God consciousness, that higher creative part of who we are that can create medicines, that can create tools, that can create entertainment, that can, buy, build, repair, and indeed renew. So there's indeed a deeper lesson on a Red Monday to be gathered by how we look at and how we address storms. Some of us, indeed, my mother and my sister and myself have endured storms. Many of you couldn't survive. You couldn't survive it. You'd be crazy. You'd be on crack. You'd be in jail. You'd be on heroin. Maybe you would have killed somebody. Maybe you would have harmed yourself. Many of you couldn't survive my background. Many of you couldn't survive my mother's stories. Many of you couldn't survive Apani's story. And there are those among me, among this community of listeners who have survived so much worse to stand up today and be God, to stand up today and be goddess. I know some of you are slow to respond to my I Wake Up God post. And I get it. I get it. In this world, you've been taught a very different idea of what God is, of who God is, and what God looks like, and how God manifests. And I understand, first and foremost, the Black woman is God. The Black woman is God. Can you hear me? God's Initiative, Arisha, Jeffrey, anybody out there? Can I be heard? Am I coming through? The Black woman is God. Hear me clearly and understand. And all humanity thus being born from that Black goddess. We're born divine just as we are born human. We're not born adults. We're not born mature. We're not born, you know, adequately prepared in some cases. Um, but we're born in our humanity. We're born in our divinity. We're born God. So we have the opportunity to create and recreate. And our artisans know what I'm talking about. Our athletes know what I'm talking about. Our mathematicians, our nurses, attorneys, you've had to study, you've had to stay up late at night, you've had to create, you've had to go into the recesses of your consciousness, go into areas, closets, rooms that normal life does not often invite for, does not often make room for. Some of you are creators by nature. It just would not be you to not create and recreate, and not find an innovation to, not find an improvement for, not find a new lane for something, or for yourself. We indeed are birthing creators today who are bringing forward ideas that have never ever existed, technology today that has never ever existed in our frame of awareness. And so there's not always going to be that great, you know, peer group of people who are going to pat you on the back and congratulate you and support you and push you forward. Indeed, there will be those who will fear, who will envy, who will feel some kind of way about why you and why you're different, and why you don't suffer the way I suffer, and why do you appear to be lucky, somehow lucky, you know, not blessed, not skilled, not able to best utilize what's available to you, lucky. You know, I have a love-hate relationship with that word luck and lucky. I'm not lucky. I'm blessed. I'm intelligent. I'm articulate. I'm well educated. I'm humble enough to sit at the feet of people who know better than me, who understand better than me, who've lived better than me, who've been before me, who might know something that I don't understand. And all of that goes into what we call magic, what we call voodoo. The idea of looking for evolution of ministry, the idea of looking for that great spell, that great practitioner who's just going to somehow magical fix and repair often stuff that many of you have picked up, bags that you've picked up for decades. Those days are behind me. Those days are behind me. Mm-mm. And our ancestors won't be pimped out for your love and relationship quest. Often, love and relationship quest for relationships that really need to be looked at in terms of their healthiness, their degree of toxicity, uh, their degree of beneficiality for ourselves and the small children are sometimes in these environments. Our ancestors will not continue to be pimped out for the lotto and the Powerball and the gambling halls and Harrah's Casino. Our ancestors will not continue to be pimped out for your petty revenge, your petty get back and payback and stab back for some man or woman who competed for the same man or woman that you competed for, who turned out to be a man or woman who didn't need to be for nobody. Who's man or woman, okay? But y'all wanted to go at each other and throw black magic and darts at each other over nothingness. Oh, and don't applaud church folks. Y'all are just as guilty. You pass shade across the aisle. You pass envy and hatred across the aisle. You pass judgment across the aisle. You pass racism and sexism across the aisle. You're not you're not free from this judgment. And so our ancestors, as we continue to move forward, will no longer support the botanical system, and we see it transforming all around us. Will no longer support the 800 number, call your psychic up, platforms. Will no longer support, the Orisha romance that is, all things lovely and nice and sweet and spice, or dark and ugly, at our leisure, you know, beyond entertainment. There's room for entertainment. There's room for comedy. There's room for horror. There's room for drama and the thriller and the reality show. There's room for that. But we have to make a clear distinction. Moving forward, there has not always been space for it up until this present moment in time space. But certainly moving forward, to be clear about what's authentic, what's real, what's true about ATR practices and traditions, authentic African based religious traditions, indigenous African based religious traditions, as opposed to magic and witchcraft, and certainly what we see demonstrated in entertainment. I am certainly not Dr. Facilier. I am certainly not Papa Justified in reality, in the real world, and certainly not in my ministry, certainly not in the dynamics of what voodoo really is. And certainly I offer you that anything you can envision, imagine, create in the physical realm is not as efficacious, it's not as real, it's not as authentic, it's not as lasting, it's not as concrete, it's not as stable as anything that we can create, certainly in the spirit realm. And it's more than belief. It requires an inner standing about ourselves, our world, our universe, who and what we are and where we live, and certainly what we have to look forward to. And I don't mean no pie in the sky. I don't mean no, in the great by and by. I might even want to talk a little bit about our extraterrestrial origins, our extraterrestrial ancestry, and offer you that this great heaven that we're moving forward to, you know, is another level of our reality, which has always been present. But we now have the technology, we now have the mindset, we now have the math, we now have whole new generations being born, with a device in their hand. Y'all calling it the pandemic baby. But these children were already being born with extraordinary gifts, extraordinary favor, extraordinary abilities, that transcend the awareness of our generation and the generations that came before us. And so we will continue to move beyond the Jetson era. We will continue to move into a more cosmic understanding about ourselves and the universe. And that will continue to transform Voodoo. It'll transform Ifa, it'll transform Santeria, and many of you will be transformed and realize that this awareness has always existed, coexisted within the teachings of ATR all along. It just has not been easily accessible. The Dogon have been talking about extraterrestrial realities, extraterrestrial ancestral lineages since the coming of the colonizers. And so we've got to grow beyond our, petty complaints about the weather. It's petty to complain about the rain. It is. It is. We can choose to stay in the house. We can choose to wear galoshes and carry an umbrella. We can choose to ride and not walk, but it is what it is, and we adjust. And without it, we'd have no food. Without it, we'd have no life. Without it, we would not have the ability to create and recreate the reality that we all share and exist in. So let's transform how we view and see a power like Oya, a power like Shango, and how that natural reference shows up within us, in us, as we navigate weather, as we navigate storms. And the storms will come. This we know. Why Marvin Gaye didn't said that, what is it, death and taxes and not weather is beyond me. Um, Death, taxes, and trouble. Maybe trouble was his pseudonym for weather, but weather is something that will come. When the weather stops, all life on the planet stops. Will certainly cease to exist when the weather stops. So we must be careful about how we pray away the storm, how we pray away the rain, how we pray away what we view as danger. I've been a coast to coast listener for decades, back to Art Bell. And I can remember Art Bell was adamantly against his callers, his listeners collectively getting together and sort of moving against a hurricane, with the fear that it could create more water where it should not be, or less water where it's certainly needed, but could create, a greater after effect than that which we can presently see or anticipate at the time. And so he was adamantly against that. Anytime that came up as a topic on the show, and that's something that I had the understanding of, but certainly acknowledged it when he would demonstrate that on the public airwaves. Just that awareness that nature itself is greater than our comprehension, while at the same time it's something that we strive to control, strive to understand, strive to document, strive to find formulas to and for and within. It's a part of our human experience, but certainly it's still a level of reality when it comes to nature that is outside of our control. We do our best to provide irrigation and water where it might be lacking, but certainly Mother Nature can provide or not provide uh, at her leisure, at her will, and what might work today may not work tomorrow. Certainly moving forward, and so looking at weather and how we operate in weather and how we allow weather to affect us as a symbol for life and life itself. Um, how big of a problem is it really? How big is the illusion of the problem really? Or is it just a lack of awareness? Some cases, a lack of asking for help. I've been in the shadow, I've been in the darkness. Some of you can sit in a place of sadness, depression, negativity, and you can convince yourself of many things in that state that become very real for you. Our minds can multiply an idea, can duplicate an idea, can paint that, picture that, three and fourth dimensionalize that, you know, rapidly, like a computer, thousands of times in a minute, reinforcing that one negative where it takes 100,000 more positive reinforcements to overcome that one negative thought, that one negative comment that we crystallize, allow it to become a computer program that we then find it difficult to shut off. So, how we see weather, the coming of weather, how we see weather actively when we're in it, and utilizing that as an extension of our co-creative power is a goal that I've always had and have to some degree achieved and seek to teach to other people. We certainly can't control the weather, but we can control our mind, our consciousness, our ability to use our power usage in the present moment in time space for real life changing manifestation and results. Right here, right now, in this most present moment in time space. I'm truly honored and grateful for those of you who showed up here with me today at high noon, US Central Standard Time. I certainly appreciate you. I love you. I support you. I am here for you in your endeavors, and I look forward to meeting you here again. All is truly and indeed a blessing if you can just see beyond the veils. Ashe, Asheo, and Ashe.